time to start and to continue on and elaborate a bit more on what has been said during the keynote addresses. It's time to start the first discussion of today's program of the Prague European Summit. I would like to welcome here my colleague moderator, Mr. Richard Jozwiak, who is Europe editor in Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, to join me here on the floor. And in next couple of minutes, I will also would like to ask the speakers of the first panel to take their seats. And in next minutes, we will discuss about the green geoeconomics and the European neighborhood. Maybe you remember the first panel of the yesterday's program, where we were actually discussing the EU geoeconomics and impacts of the war in Ukraine on the, let's say, role of the European Union in geoeconomic, let's say, world and in this field. So we will go much deeper and we will focus on the European neighborhood. Let me also remind you that you can join the discussion via application Slido. You can find us under the hashtag PES 2022. You can see the hashtag here on the screen, and you can also find the instructions in the materials you got at the entrance. So I would like to now ask my colleague moderator, Mr. Jozwiak, to take the floor and start the first discussion of our today's program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suppose the mic is working, yeah. So yes, I'm Richard Jozwiak. I'm the editor of Radio Free Europe, and we will continue right now on a topic of green geoeconomics and the European neighborhood. And I think essentially there is 3-4 questions we'll try to address here. First one is the obvious one. How are we going to get rid of Russian hydrocarbons and our addiction to it? Secondly, how are we doing this with still being so ambitious on our green transition? Because the EU is not giving up on its green transition, neither is the Western Balkans. Thirdly, how do we, and this is something that Mr. Nuredini has already talked about, how do we do this while bringing in our neighborhood, Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership countries, but also North Africa? But then maybe also another thing that it's worth considering as well, how do we do this without making it an exploitative relationship, a neo-colonial relationship where the EU basically just grabs resources and there's no added value to it? So with me, I have to my right, Naser Nuredini. He has already made a brilliant speech here. He needs no further introduction. Minister of Environment and Fiscal Planning in North Macedonia. We have Vesela Cherneva, the head of the ECFR office in Sofia, also deputy director ECFR. For us journalists, she's known as a fantastic spokesperson, used to be at the Bulgarian MFA. Finally, nice to see you in person and not only on the phone. And then probably one of the, well, I think the best energy expert in Europe on these sort of issues, Dirk Büschle. I'm not putting pressure on you, Dirk. Obviously known as the chairholder of the European Energy Policy Chair at the College of Europe, my alma mater. So nice to see an old professor back again. Vesela, I might actually start with you, ladies first.
Sure.
And maybe even a bit on Bulgaria, because Bulgaria has always been seen as a very vulnerable country when it comes to Russian energy. We've seen it many times before, this energy blackmailing, and it's a feeling that if Bulgaria can manage it, so perhaps can the EU. So will we manage without Russian hydrocarbons, especially this winter?
I hope so. End of April, Bulgaria was, together with Poland, the first, they were the first two European countries to which Gazprom cut off the gas. And this was at the same time a surprise, but also in a way it was expected, because it is quite clear that Russia is using gas as a weapon. The weaponization of energy has really brought about an awakening. And if I can also quote your initial question, how much is geopolitics part of the energy calculation of Europe? I think this is It is this spring that Europe really realized to the full extent how much this is the case. But coming back to Bulgaria, I think there are now very few people who have any illusions about the real goals of Kremlin and Gazprom with this. The maybe good part of the story is that gas is only 16% of the Bulgarian energy mix. So in a way, it was a shock, but it was, and it was a systemic shock clearly, but it was not, let's say, detrimental to the overall economy. In the meantime, like all the others, we have been looking for other sources. Maybe the biggest change since April is the opening of the interconnector with Greece. This is a project that has been in the works for 12 years. I mean, this is quite a remarkable, again, victory of Gazprom, if I may put it this way, to make such a short pipeline be, worked on for such a long time, not without the help of the Bulgarian governments, of successive Bulgarian governments. And so where we are now, we have a couple of alternatives, but like everybody else in Europe, we know that even if this winter works out okay, next winter is probably going to be even more difficult. And I think this is the calculation we all have to make. What is the price that we're ready to pay to Russia in order to stay independent? I think the political decision is taken. There is no way that any government in Europe is going to go back to Russia energy dependency. The minister has spoken about renewables. I think the big potential, and this was also mentioned at the panel last night, is in decreasing consumption. This is a big open field in the Balkans, not only the Western Balkans, I think elsewhere as well. We have a lot of energy to save. A lot of the energy is going actually in a very uneconomical way in the air. So that can be worked on. And last, if you allow me, this whole idea of regional cooperation should really become a reality much more than it was until now. We have, for instance, pipelines that are empty right now because the Russian gas is no more. Those pipelines could, and they go north-south, those pipelines could be actually reversed. And if we are smart enough to use the gas coming from Middle East and North Africa, LNG gas, but that also concerns oil, I think we can use that infrastructure and even be helpful to countries like Ukraine, like Moldova, and so on and so forth. This is a matter of a wider European planning and common purchasing. We're actually in Brussels, they're talking about it today. So I think it's really high time for that. Thanks.
Mr. Bushler, turning to you, please save us now. Like, how are we gonna solve this? We hear maybe this winter is all right, but Mr. Chernova is talking about next winter will be difficult. We're talking with Mr. Nuredini is talking about interconnection, about money to spend for technology for places in Western Balkans, for example. Lower consumption, yes. So please complete the puzzle for us. What do we need to do?
Well, thanks a lot. I'm a bit afraid that I don't have the saving formula or maybe not even concrete pieces for how we'll be getting through this winter. As has been said, it looks like Europe has been taking this crisis seriously, has been responding to the crisis very quickly. And I do actually share this expectation and hope that with the measures that have been taken, and this is evidently a consequence to a shock that we felt, which has a lot to do with the self-created dependence, with the self-created reliance on not only one source of gas, but one fuel as well. But given the circumstances and given all the omissions of the past, I think we have taken the appropriate measures now for this winter. What is important is, and not only for the next winter, how we continue. And that is something I believe that you have put very well in your introduction, in the minister's speech, and also in the topic of this panel. It's about, you call it geoeconomics, so I think the term geopolitics is more common. And that has a lot to do with how Europe will position itself in its neighborhood, but also beyond, in order to avoid crises like the present one. The original concept of geopolitics comes from an academic back in the 19th century, Rudolf Kjellén, a Swede, who stated the obvious, that we're all dependent on geography and climate, and that it is important, essential for a state to have access to resources. And in today's world, we have seen how this can be interpreted wrongly, in the sense that we turn this need to access into dependencies, but also that in tomorrow's world, that's not going to change. We do have, of course, wind, we do have solar, they are ubiquitous, but they need land, they need other preconditions, so they will always, energy resources will always be scarce. And even more than in the recent past, in the further past, we have also interpreted these messages wrong. The first revolution, industrial revolution, essentially was one that relied on slavery. The second one relied on colonialism. So we have to, in the relation with the countries on which Europe will always be dependent, we'll have to change that formula for sure. And this is evidently under the impression of today's war. We feel something that has been only discussed in academic circles so far, the weaponization of energy, that energy is not a commodity. That's, for instance, the German approach, Wandel durch Handel, so change through trade. It's not as simple as that, and it has turned out to be a little bit, not only a little bit naive, especially vis-à-vis the Putin regime. But will we ever achieve a situation where we'll be independent of foreign providers, foreign suppliers of energy? I don't think so. I think we have to recognize that a strive for autarky is not possible, and if it were possible, it would come at a very high cost. So we have to find smarter ways on how to use the combination of resources, use globalization also to make sure that not only we will have the energy we need, but also that Europe is not vulnerable and is not getting back into the old dependence pattern. And this is a discussion that, of course, is also being had also on political levels. The French, by majority, introduced the concept of strategic autonomy. It's not something that is loved all over Europe. It's also not something that's very clear, to be honest. I would interpret it as opposed to being independent, which is, in my view, is just a chimera, it's just not being achievable, as opposed to energy or resource independence. This would mean to be able to act and to keep the autonomy to act and not only to react as we see now. And we do see, as we are observing and participating in European energy and climate policy, we do these things happening. We do see joint gas purchases, which is something that was unthinkable only a few months ago. We see a new industrial policy, I think you'll be talking about that, emerging, where also Europe tries to better coordinate its approaches towards hydrogen, its approaches towards batteries, towards rare earths, etc. So these are elements. But in the end, what strategic autonomy really requires, and that brings me to our neighborhood, is smart alliances, not alliances that are one-way streets, so not alliances where Europe tries to get access to natural resources by exploiting or by using the neighbors as resource-rich countries. There may, of course, be and should be exchange, but in the end, and to achieve our common goal, especially in the face of Europe's relative meaninglessness on a global scale, we need to build smarter alliances. And I think this depends a lot on good governance. We see ideas floating. We have a European political community now, but without really governance elements yet. We have the accession instrument, which is not going as it should be going because it is not yielding results, and we see that rightly so. On the side of the Western Balkans, for instance, the whole formula is something that need to be rethought and needs to, first of all, yield results and not just talks. And my hope is that Ukraine defending our values and liberties, having been admitted to this club of accession talks, will have enough weight, also moral weight, to speed that up. But in the absence of full accession, we do need, and that would be my last comment, we do need communities. I'm not only an academic, but also working for the energy community, where North Macedonia is a leading member, and we are cooperating with Minister Nuredini also on all these issues that we are discussing here, you have been discussing yesterday, again, based on a good governance. I hope the governance is good enough. There's always improvements possible. I just want to maybe outline some elements which I believe are important to make sure that the EU engages in these smart partnerships and does not fall back into old patterns of the 19th or 20th century. One element is that there is a true equality, and that Europe buys into these communities. So it cannot be something where, for instance, the Western Balkans are left alone, organize among yourselves, and we are available to help you. Now, Europe needs to take responsibilities as well, including financial responsibilities. That's what we learn inside Europe. That's an expression of solidarity, and it needs to be extended not in any watered down form, but in precisely the same way towards the Western Balkans. That's the essence of the Green Deal. That's the essence of the transition. And on top of that, we need, that's also governance, we need good and smart decision making, which is also not one where we have one-way street decisions, take it or leave it situations, but based on a true dialogue and based on joint coming to solutions where we in Europe take serious what our partners put on the table, because we are all going through this situation together. That has been said. And we need to find the solutions in communities also together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Mr. Nuredini, smart alliances was two words that Mr. Bushler used. Do you see that in the relationship between, for example, the EU and the Western Balkans? Is there a community? Is there a smart alliance? Or is there still something where can there be improvements on that one without exploitation?
Shall I be political or honest?
Be both critical and honest.
Listen, I'm sure there is an alliance, smart alliance. Right now, I think it's more an alliance of convenience for both sides, of course. Convenience, of course, for the EU because they want us to integrate as soon as possible. Alliance smart, very much so for us because we want to be part of the EU. I don't think anyone should question, at least North Macedonia's ambition to be part of the European Union. We want to be held accountable for our actions. We want to be held accountable for what we do. There is an alliance. I mean, there is this not only smart, it's necessary, it's actually absolutely necessary. We don't see ourselves anywhere else apart from within the EU. Hence why we are actually implementing, we're trying to write a lot of the laws or actually change the legislation and harmonize our laws with a lot of help from the energy community again here. So they're not easy. because I said it earlier, and this is why I repeat it. I hope you don't mind me making this comparison, but I think sometimes we politicians think like hedge fund managers, because our mandates are 4 years long. A hedge fund manager needs to show results on a quarterly basis, and they need to show profits, which is actually votes, and if you actually compare it to that way. So politicians need to be showing some change, some drastic, great things which will benefit the citizens, and in tomorrow's elections, we need to get more votes. However, though, maybe it's time we all start thinking like pension fund managers, thinking in the long term, less return on investment, but in the long run, it's actually more sustainable. So I said it earlier, and this government at least, in this energy crisis, we've been the first one which took the unbelievable decision to increase the electricity prices, because we have a capped electricity price in our country. It's regulated by regulator de facto, and we have actually increased the electricity price twice already. Because in the past there wasn't. It's not a liberal, it's not free. And we are unfortunately there where we are today. As mentioned as well earlier, we have not fully invested in energy efficiency. Due to the price, the very cheap price, if you ask me, what we have right now, cheap price of electricity in our country for the households and for the small and micro businesses, people have not invested in energy efficiency. And the idea was this, that after the pandemic, and I think this is where things went a bit wrong. I mean, it went a bit wrong. They actually went really wrong, I'm sorry. The pandemic was very wrong. But so what happened was the idea that we have an economic recovery, a rebound. And the rebound was supposed to be in green investments. That was the whole idea. And I think the whole of Europe was doing the similar thing. A lot of European countries were looking to further invest in energy efficiency. It would create new jobs. It would actually use locally sourced and produced material. Unfortunately, the energy crisis came. And in our case, we had to sacrifice a lot of our budget to import electricity, because we don't produce all the electricity we have, the needs we have. So we imported a lot at a tenfold of the price that we're selling at locally. And smart alliance, very natural alliance with the EU. I mean, President van der Leyen recently was in the Balkans, and she was delivering the allocations of the promised support, energy support. So, yes, absolutely.
So there's already, I asked you all to file in your questions via Slido using the hashtag PES 2022. And there's one here that's actually directly about this, because it says, how can the EU update and enhance its tools for supporting green transition in places such as Eastern Europe, but also Western Balkans? Like, what concretely should the EU do for this money?
As I said earlier, it's not about money. I mean, there's enough money around. I mean, we're hearing about, I don't know, how much was the Repower EU? 300 billion, 800 billion? What was the plan? I mean, it's numbers which are unfathomable. We're thinking about numbers which are, I mean, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of money. We have to do our part as well, though. So we used to see ourselves, unfortunately, in the past, we were an island. We were a landlocked island, if that makes any sense. We had a zero interconnectivity with our neighbors. The only gas interconnector we have is with Bulgaria. Only now are we actually going to start building one with Greece. The only energy interconnectivity we have for electricity was with, I think it was only with Bulgaria as well. Now we're with Greece, we're building with Albania, we had, of course, with Serbia from historically. So we have to do our homework ourselves. It's not only what the EU can do for us. The question is, are we ready to accept what the EU is offering us as well? And it takes a lot of time. What the EU can do more for the Western Balkan countries is help with the technical documentation to be able to start the projects. This is one of the things that a lot of the Western Balkan countries lack. There's a lot of pre-accession funds. There's a lot of support being offered by the EU. What we lack is, unfortunately, to be prepared with the technical documentation, with the studies, on time, and as requested, in order to be able to use the funds being offered by the EU.
Thanks. I guess there is one question, though, that I think we're skirting through it a bit. It's but it is a bit of an elephant in the room, and that's looking at it from a consumer's perspective. Of course, we have seen big protests here in Prague. It's not all about high energy bills, but a lot of it is connected to it. I see my energy bills, and the big question here is really, and this is actually for all three of you, well, okay, fine, but how much is this going to cost us? And what do you answer a normal person on the street? Yeah, fine, okay, green transition, of course, but like, listen, I can't face my bill next month. How do you answer that question?
Shall I start?
Start, Dirk,
Yeah.
yes.
And again, I don't have a straightforward number, evidently. But I also want to develop a bit what Minister Nuredini said. These partnerships evidently need commitments from both sides. And we know what the European Union needs to do. It needs to treat the countries in the neighborhood as their own, whether this is through accession or through other forms of cooperation. There is always a preference for fast accession, but if not, we'll have to do something, an as-if. But that also requires commitments by the countries, and that's essentially what the energy community is also for, to make sure that reforms are taking place. I think, Minister Nuredini, you had a great metaphor of the hedge fund manager versus the pension fund manager. Sometimes I have the impression, and when we talk about real managers in the utilities, for instance, in the Western Balkans, there is no management at all. Taking responsibility, these are simple things. Corporate responsibility for decisions you take. These utilities, many of them are still stuck in the past. They don't have plans necessarily on how to move forward. A manager anywhere in Western Europe probably would be fired without a plan for the future. So I think earlier we heard about the rule of law. This is an abstract concept, but also these very general principles. Then, of course, something, and that comes to your question about the prices. The prices have always been low. We know that this is for good reasons in Western Balkans, in Ukraine, Moldova as well. And that's probably the reason why energy efficiency has not really been developing, why also there have been no investment signals that companies could take and take forward investments in the future. So yes, energy is a costly commodity. That's just something we cannot deny right now. We cannot, and I think we should not block that price signal, but we should develop cushions that protect, especially those that need to be protected from the impact. And there we can, I think, do more targeted support to those customers who are vulnerable, rather than to treating everybody equally and applying the same standards. And maybe the last thing, because the question also was what concretely can be done to get Europe and its neighborhood together in these communities in the European Green Deal, essentially. One thing that is lacking, one element, and I hope we can also discuss it with the minister, is giving carbon a price. That is something that Europe has been already for a couple of years and decades engaging in, and it has been a driver of the transition. Right now, doesn't matter so much because the gas price has been so high. But for the imminent future, I think it is important that also we send these price and investment signals through pricing in externalities.
Mr. Chairman, can I get your idea on this as well? Especially how do you convince people that they should be on board on this? Because they will obviously vote on the politicians who offer the simplest solution, usually turning the blind eye to it.
Sure. I think there have been different solutions in the different member states in the EU and beyond. But what is important for people is, I think, to make a difference, that the state makes a difference, that you don't subsidize everybody across the board, that those who actually have a multi-million euro businesses get higher subsidies simply because they have a higher turnaround, and the small kind of companies or the individuals don't don't feel supported enough. So we don't have everywhere the category of energy poverty, which gives you the instruments for some sort of a stratification. But because I am not an energy expert, but a foreign policy expert, if you allow me, I would add the kind of geopolitical layer to this. If we look at the Western Balkans especially, you will immediately realize that politicians use the public discontent to also steer geopolitically their countries. And here I mean primarily Serbia. We have quite clear kind of Russian energy narrative, if I can put it this way, that is very often popular in Serbia. And how do you turn this around so that people don't think that all the evil comes from the EU and all the benefits come from Moscow? I think this is part of your question on the price, because the price is not only what we pay at the end of the month. The price is what we pay in terms of our politics, right? How our politics function, how our political leaders make their decisions. And I think now is people are very vulnerable, and publics are very vulnerable, because they can be very easily manipulated through the energy prices, through the energy decisions governments are taking, and we may end up in a situation whereby the EU actually pays a lot of money for supporting the vulnerable populations in the Balkans, but also within the EU itself, and yet governments kind of tend to misinterpret the situation, and still publicly, they end up not steering away from kind of the common foreign policy agenda of the EU. I'm saying this because we also have right now Hungary, for instance, blocking the borrowing for Ukraine, for the financial support of Ukraine. I mean, this is a real geopolitical problem that starts from the way politicians interpret, the whole core EU policies on the matter of, Russian weaponization, not only of energy, but geoeconomic tools in general.
Yes, you want to come in on the Serbia question?
No.
It's
for environment, not for politics.
There's a question here by Tommy that might be interesting for both Mrs. Chernova and Nuredini. It's like, do the Western Balkans cooperate in addressing the energy crisis, and where is the potential? Look at it from a North Macedonian perspective, and perhaps even from a Bulgarian one. I know you don't want to be called Western Balkans, but you're in the neighborhood. So the question is, do the Western Balkan countries cooperate in addressing the energy crisis, and where is the potential?
Very good one. I like that. Unfortunately, we haven't in the past, quite frankly. This is something we were speaking about with the energy community when Mr. Bushler here, and the idea is here, listen, we are all small countries in comparison to European countries. We all have the strategy of being very all energy independent. It's impossible, quite frankly. The idea is to actually have a regional energy strategy, and this is something we've been trying to start. I've spoken to my dear colleagues from the neighborhood, from the environment and energy, etc. We have different needs at different times of the year. You see, we are unfortunately, after the breakup of Yugoslavia, the whole thing, something didn't really continue to work as it did. Back then it was being balanced through. So I think I'll use an example. For example, North Macedonia needs more energy in winter and less in summer. Vice versa, I'll use Albania, or our next neighbor. They need more energy in summer due to tourism and less energy in winter. So I think it is imperative that we actually create a regional collaboration between the countries for Serbia, Bulgaria, and it's not Western Balkan, it's the region. I'll call it the region. We need a regional approach. We need to have a interdependency between each other, and that interdependency, and the more you create the trade and the depend on each other in a positive, as an ally, I think it will just create better relationships, and somehow maybe we forget some of the issues we had in the past. And this will also not only create a solution for energy, but also for a political, foreign policy things that we might have disagreed about in the past. We'll bring each other closer. If you don't mind, I'd just like to come back to your previous question, just a little bit, because I think it's important to look at it from an economic aspect as well. How do you try to convince your citizens that it's worth it? There's no choice. Sorry, is it worth it? Or we continue being dependent on the Russian gas, really, or we continue to move away and try and create find alternative sources. What really happened here, and why have the prices really skyrocketed? Unfortunately, after the pandemic, we all thought we're going to have an economic rebound, a growth in GDP, and we're going to have one of the best times, one of the best periods ever. Unfortunately, that did not happen. We got into an energy crisis. The energy crisis shows how susceptible our economy is to energy. So we have an inflation rate of over 10% in some of the countries. Unfortunately, the growth is nowhere. So it's actually an inflation rate with no economic growth. So right now, that's why we're all finding it very difficult to pay for the bills, because if the economy grew at the same rate, we would have better wages, our wages will be increasing, and everything will be happening, production economy will be growing. Unfortunately, that's not happening. The economy is not growing anywhere close to the inflation that is being caused absolutely by the energy. So the reality, the real answer to citizens is, this can happen anytime. It can be used as a tool, as a weapon, if you want to call it, against our countries, against our citizens, anytime they want. Nord Stream can be shut. I mean, let's say we forget about it. The Nord Stream can be shut down any day of the week, and you're going to have the same issues. So we need to become less dependent. This is the answer, because we are going to be reliant, so we need to find other ways, other sources, other solutions. Otherwise, this will continue, and we are going to get poorer. We are getting poorer in reality. The money you had in your account yesterday is worth less than yesterday, 10% less than it was back then as today, and you can't buy close to the same thing you bought last year. I think I confused that a bit too much.
No, Mr. Chairman, very clear, Western Balkans cooperation. Can Bulgaria play a role there, you think?
All the Western Balkan countries have different energy mixes, and this is one important kind of point of knowledge to have. There's some of them are actually much more into renewables, others still very much rely on coal. Then there is a third group which is focused on fossil fuels. And so I think having in mind this very complicated puzzle, you have to be able to create something that works together, and that's not that easy. This is why I think this whole idea of regional integration in energy is so important, and it's mainly about electricity. I agree with the minister. This is the easiest way to connect the neighborhood. Just do cables as many as you can. Do interconnectors, be it gas or hydrogen one day when that happens. And clearly, I would say we cannot talk about Western Balkans that much in this respect. We should be talking about the Balkans, including Greece, including Bulgaria, including Romania. This whole region should have, as I said at the beginning, much more south-north kind of logic in it in terms of its energy integration that it has now. Actually, Turkey there will play also a very, very important role. We haven't mentioned Turkey, but without Turkey, none of the energy diversification we have seen until now could not happen before we did the interconnection with Greece. So my point is, we cannot anymore treat this region as, separate groups, although countries can be very different in terms of how their energy is structured.
Guys, I'm nervously looking at my watch. We pretty much have done what we should have done, but still I want some sort of closing remarks, and take a bit of time for people to, it's a coffee break, so you still can rush there 5 minutes later. So what I want you guys to do is, you talked about the pension manager, and that gave me an idea. So you're all three pension managers, now pension fund managers, and you're going to advise the masters of the world how they're going to deal with energy. And you're going to get two advices. How they're going to survive, not this winter, next winter, but all the winters in the future. So, pension fund manager Buchler, what 2 advices will you give me? How should we overcome this?
Well, I'm afraid I wouldn't probably get a lot of recognition for those advices, because they're all known. And the 2 advices would be something that's been in the political, legal, international sphere for very long. One is decarbonization, so that's the idea of the Paris Agreement. And the other one is what we have been discussing here, forming alliances, doing it together. There's a lot to be said about the Western Balkans, and how that in this microcosmos can be done better. We need to expand that to the world. It's important. As a pension fund manager, I need to know why to do that, not only to keep the pensions for those who need it. It's important to evidently face the crisis of climate, of global warming, but also to get out of this revolution, this industrial revolution, as a first mover, as a winner, and not as a loser. And I think we need to learn the lessons from the past and do this together, at least in Europe right now.
Pension fund manager Chernova.
Look, those who think about pensions, they also think a lot about the past. And I don't think we should be really, I mean, this is the danger, I think, that that we're facing, that we may be thinking about the past much more than we should. This is a little bit the spirit of the time. It seems that people currently are much more afraid of the future. They're much more fierce about the future. So we should not, and I'm saying this because the choice can be really between a decarbonization and energy security. And we don't realize this when we sit in Prague or Berlin or Brussels. But I think this is a very real danger, that we go back to old ways, that we go back to coal, that we go back to using the same old kind of technologies that we know, simply because we're afraid for our security, energy security mostly, but not only. And so we have to overcome our fears. I think this would be my first advice. Don't look at the past that much. We'll get there. We just need to be a bit less fearless. A bit less fearful. Secondly, and we did not talk about the Global South, but I think this is my second piece of advice. When we look at the UN General Assembly, the big portion of African countries that did not vote in favor of the Ukraine resolutions tells us one thing. It tells us we have not been good enough in giving those countries the political space to work with us. We have to start rethinking our relationship, especially with Africa. And we have to really see how we can leave less space for China, for Russia in Africa. And this is, I guess this is a subject to a separate session, but this will first and foremost depend on the Europeans acting in a kind of open-minded, fair way, and really building up alliances that are not only smart, but where both sides have really the sense that they're on equal footing. That is, I think, our best way to bridge faster to the future.
So, pension manager Nuredini, we have decarbonization, we have not being fearful about what's been, we have building alliances, Global South and elsewhere. Can you complete the picture with 2 advices?
Difficult, really. I have to go actually on the first one. I have to agree first of all, the first one, that we shouldn't, listen, every crisis creates opportunities. And every crisis that you can learn something out of it and walk out stronger. And the idea is to walk out of this stronger, walk out of it as winners, and I fully agree with that. We need to change. There's no question, that's it. And one of the reasons when I say pension fund, that's not my pension, it's actually my child's future. That's what I'm thinking about here. It's my child's future I'm talking about, or our children's future. That's the pension we should be looking at. So we need to walk out of this stronger. We realize that we have been maybe slightly, as you said, we shouldn't look too much back in the past, but we have been slightly reckless and haven't really thought about the fact of what these events could cause, how they could disturb our daily lives. The second one is actually a very, and please do not hate me for saying this, it's going to be tough. That's the advice. It's going to be tough. The next couple of years will be tough. Winter will be tough. Anybody who's saying things are going to be good, they're going to be great and rosy, I want to know what their magic solution is. These are going to be a couple of tough years. We need to bite the lip, get through it, be strong together, stand in solidarity, in absolute solidarity. That is a must. If we don't do that, then it's going to be difficult. So stand in solidarity. It's going to be tough. That's it.
And on that happy note, I thank you all three for coming here. Please give a warm applause to Mr. Nuredini, Mr. Chernola, and Mr. Bushler. Thank you.